Could you make a video game that could control people's minds?
A harmless game becomes a dangerous addiction.
What if someone's trying to use the game for some purpose other than pleasure?
And the crew fall victim to its evil hypnotic powers.
We can't trust anyone anymore, not even the captain.
Can Wesley rescue the crew from total mind control?
Okay, so I'm not really seeking to ask this question, but I think it is a good way to start thinking about creative practice and designing experimental games and games for research. If you want to design a game for a project or to look into some specific type of topic, you need to start thinking about the ways in which the games we design influence the players that play them. And this isn't some conspiracy theory. Games and apps are designed in ways to make us think and act in particular ways. We'll talk about this some more today, but above all, I want you to leave this video with a better grasp of what can be achieved by designing games with specific intentions of causing specific outcomes. I'm going to give a little background to help put this talk into some kind of context, and then I'll talk about some of the ways games are designed today and how we can use games in research. Ultimately, I'm going to conclude that while games probably can't control people's minds completely, the way we design games for research and play should keep in mind that design decisions we make do influence players, at least while they're playing the game. While we can't predict how they're going to act entirely, understanding our design choices can provide us with a better understanding of the implications of their actions. You might think that controlling people's minds with games is ludicrous, but many people feel completely the opposite way, and for good reason. Gaming disorder is a very real possibility, and at very least an incredibly serious subject worth treating with respect. Chris Staniforth from England and Taiwanese gamers Chuang and Chenrong Yu both died after playing games for excessive periods of time. Surely it's not too unreasonable to suggest that the designs of these games played some role in these deaths. Ilan Berenholtz, associate professor at Rutgers University, stated in an interview with the website University Press Online, he believes video games are brainwashing you into believing you are succeeding in life, like a magic trick. The brain is being fooled, saying you're doing great, therefore receiving pleasure. Now, I don't know how you feel about this, but as someone who grew up playing video games, it's difficult not to simply discount all of this as the feelings of being cheered up by your favorite video game, just like being cheered up by your favorite film or book. However, what's interesting to me, and to Professor Barinholtz, are the reasons motivating countries like South Korea, Japan, and most recently China to take these claims of games and brainwashing extremely seriously. One of the most interesting claims, I think, is that the magic tricks mentioned by Barinholtz aren't just a freak accident, but rather are the result of conscious decisions made by game designers. Scholars like Zahir Hussain, Mark Griffiths, and Shumalia Youssafi, as well as Natsia Darvish and many others, have suggested that the potentially addictive properties of games must be investigated and that game design companies should be held responsible for their designs. Indeed, after a long debate back and forth, gaming disorder has been included in the ICD-11, the International Classification of Diseases, on the understanding that gaming disorder affects a small number of gamers and is characterized by significant impact on the life of the affected person as a result of excessive gameplay. While this decision has been criticized by scholars within the game studies field, including Zahir Hussain mentioned above, on the grounds that this is premature inclusion and will simply generate stigma and result in wasted public funds, it's still worth considering the impacts of a decision like this. It is the consensus among a majority of scholars that excessive and life-damaging attachment to digital entertainment is something that is possible as a result of game design. Let's think of an example of a game that can encourage excessive play. Think about something like Cookie Clicker. The premise here is simple. There's a cookie and a message saying, you feel like making cookies, but nobody wants to eat your cookies. By clicking on the giant cookie to the left of the screen, we're given rewards as players. We're told we have made cookies just by clicking. Eventually, we can see the levels we need to ascend to, making 15 cookies to be at the level of an inanimate cursor, 100 to be a grandma, and with the tiers above that left as a mystery. Looking at the restrictive and somewhat insulting design of Cookie Clicker without context, it might seem like bad design. The limited options, you can only click the cookie, restricts what players can do. The mystery of the hidden tiers, the lack of encouragement from the messages at the top of the screen. This isn't encouraging play, it's heckling the player. However, if we look at design textbooks that specialize in encouraging user retention, such as the infamous Evil by Design, we can see how these design elements are intentional. Following the textbook to the letter, Cookie Clicker gives the player the sense they are being rewarded for their efforts, rather than simply making numbers increase by clicking. It stimulates a sense of desire in players by generating mystery, providing a partial reinforcement schedule, and inflating people's sense of overconfidence. Most importantly, Evil by Design tells us that when all else fails, we should make our products into a game. Following these guidelines, it's possible for a product like Cookie Clicker to encourage players to continue playing long after the game stops being fun. However, what we can achieve with games goes far beyond simply encouraging people to play. Games can also be used to communicate complex ideas. War games, for instance, might encourage players to become accustomed to depictions of violence or even desensitize to them entirely. Although an old game now, Full Spectrum Warrior was a first-person shooter developed through close ties to the United States military. The game that was released was built out of a training simulator called C4. Playing Full Spectrum Warrior and games that have been inspired by it, there is a sense that we are engaging with military training. Now, this doesn't mean that we're being trained as soldiers just by playing video games. However, it does mean that a desire to play war-themed games may require proximity to real-world military applications. A more recent example of this is the US military's esports team that retains a presence in online games and communities for the means of recruitment. While the average player may just want to play a fun video game, doing so puts them in close proximity to recruitment and propaganda from the US military. Thinking about Cookie Clicker again, all of the techniques used to make that game fun and addictive, or an exciting experience, are also present in Full Spectrum Warrior and more modern war games. However, in war games, we have to put aside or desensitize ourselves to the excessive violence on display first, in order to focus on reaping the rewards of play. We have to ignore the violence of modern warfare to find the cookie clicker that lies within. For Nick Dyer-Witherford, games make real-world violence banal. Rather than attempting to aggrandize war or demonize it, playing military-themed games, they suggest, can lead to the idea that war is simply a part of life. Now, while this isn't the same as saying something outlandish like games are training people to fight wars or games make people more violent, it's not that far off either. As Dyer-Witherford suggests, the banality of violence is an important step in achieving what they call perpetual conflict. Games can achieve this kind of subliminal messaging due to a phenomenon Ian Bogost calls procedural rhetoric. If you don't know, rhetoric is an ancient skill for using language to convince other people of your position. It was developed by ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle. Indeed, Aristotle defined the rhetorician as someone who is always able to see what is persuasive. Rhetoric is still taught today, and its influence can be felt in education. Something as simple as the way we structure essays. Have a clear thesis statement. Put the paper in context, present your evidence, present and refute a counter-argument, conclude with a repetition of the thesis statement. This structure is thousands of years old. Well, unlike the rhetoric of ancient Greece, procedural rhetoric relies on the processual quality of computers and games. Instead of persuading an audience by constructing an essay according to certain rules, procedural rhetoric is the attempt to construct the rules of a game or program so that players feel like they're coming to conclusions on their own steam. To be clear, it probably wasn't the intention of the designers of Full Spectrum Warrior to make people feel apathetic towards armed conflict. But that doesn't mean that they haven't created something that has the potential to produce that feeling through its procedural rhetoric. To be clear, not all games set out with such nefarious intentions or produce these negative outcomes. It's possible to design games for good too, such as to draw attention to climate change or industrial excess. This was the goal taken up by Italian news games developers Mole Industria with their infamous McDonald's game, in which players must utilize unscrupulous business tactics in order to make profit. The impact we have on the environment becomes clear in a game like this, as we aren't able to avoid impacting the environment even by making simple, seemingly harmless decisions. Ian Bogost states that the McDonald's game mounts a procedural rhetoric about the necessity of corruption in the global fast food business, and the overwhelming temptation of greed which leads to more corruption. In order to succeed in the long term, the player must use growth hormones, they must coerce banana republics, and must mount PR and lobbying campaigns. Furthermore, the temptation to destroy indigenous villages, launch bribery campaigns, recycle animal parts, and cover up health risks is tremendous, although the financial benefit from doing so is only marginal. Games like the McDonald's game give us a chance to see the impact of large corporations on the environment and understand the impact of seemingly small decisions. A similar game, Power Up, has been developed by researchers at the University of Stirling in collaboration with the Scottish games company Hyperluminal Games. In Power Up, you must make decisions on the part of an energy company to attempt to find solutions to sustainable energy problems. However, it becomes clear quickly this isn't as easy as it sounds. The design of these games relies on the cascading complexity of seemingly small decisions, producing stressful situations for players that require unethical or simply creative solutions to overcome. The rules of the game that produce these situations, and the realizations players hopefully come to, are the procedural rhetorics of these games. By playing, rather than by reading or listening to a TED Talk, we become imbued with the knowledge that making profit requires cutting costs and impacting the environment. When designing games, then, it's possible to influence players in certain directions through design decisions. We can encourage players to play more by playing on their insecurities and their vanities. Using similar techniques, we can even encourage players to think about more complex topics, both economic and social. It's important, however, not to see this influence on players as a direct one-to-one phenomenon. Rather, we should understand that the games we make or programs we design can push users in specific directions. But what do you think? In the description below, I'm going to include some links to a Padlet where you can answer some questions about this topic and ask any that you might have of your own. Really looking forward to hearing more from you. And I hope that we can in turn make this into kind of a wider conversation about games, why they exist, and the extent to which they can influence the players that play them.